let us start, Scott, with the insinuation or rumors or conversations that are happening in Washington about approving long-range strikes for Ukraine, so Ukraine can use long-range capabilities to strike deep inside of Russia. Zelensky is about to meet with Joe Biden in Washington. Joe Biden has said that they're working on this issue, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about this on the Ukrainian side, and it seems to be a lot of desperation and heavy pushing to allow this to be approved. Scott, what is the risks here, though? What exactly will this portend should it be formally approved? If you could just talk about the significance of this.
The risks of thermonuclear war. I mean, this is literally lunacy, the definition of lunacy. I don't understand what the Biden administration's seeking to do. I mean, I know we have a policy of supporting Ukraine, et cetera, but is Ukraine worth America? I mean, are we saying that Ukraine is an existential extension of America? That if we lose Ukraine, we lose America? Therefore, we're willing to bet it all on this vain hope that Ukraine can somehow stabilize this situation, right this ship, and move on to victory over Russia, understanding that Ukrainian victory over Russia means the end of the world. So either way we go, we appear to be saying that we're willing to put the lives of all Americans at risk for Ukraine, because that's the logical, that's the way this logically plays out. In the short term, I think Russia will do as Russia's always done, show an ability to absorb these provocations, to manage the escalation, because Russia is focused on strategic objectives, like the big one in BRICS in Kazan next month, the BRICS summit, that will redefine the world in a major way. Away from American hegemony to multilateralism, moving BRICS from theory to reality, following through on the promise made by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in February of 2021 when they met prior to the Beijing Olympics in Beijing, and said that the rules-based international order, that is the foundation of America's foreign policy and national security policy, is a threat to international security, and that the Russians and the Chinese will now spearhead an effort to supplant it with what they call the law-based international order, something that reflects the values enshrined in the United Nations Charter as opposed to the unilateral dictate of America. Putin, I don't think, is going to allow anything to happen that will disrupt BRICS. And that includes making sure that Russia doesn't overreact to any provocation by the Ukrainians at the behest of their NATO masters. Now, if Ukraine is dumb enough to hit something of strategic value or inflict harm on Russian national level command and control, I think the game dramatically changes, and therein lies the problem. You see, the United States isn't in control of this. We think we are. We think we're providing the weapons. I'm pretty sure that this green light that we're giving them comes with heavy caveats on where they can and can't strike. But we've just seen the United States, repeatedly push through its own red lines. Remember, Joe Biden once said that doing this could lead to World War III. Well, you're doing it, Joe. You're doing it. So, yeah, I agree with them. This could lead to World War III. This is one of the most dangerous things that has happened in modern history. This is a total disregard on the part of the United States for the lives of humanity. To do what? Again, I just have to ask, to do what? Score propaganda points? Give a failing Ukrainian leader one last go around at legitimacy? What are they trying to accomplish from this? Because it's not going to defeat Russia.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you, Scott. What exactly could they do with this newfound permission? Because it is my estimation that there aren't many good options here for Ukraine. So perhaps you could talk about, well, what exactly are the options that will be afforded Ukraine once this approval comes down the road, and how will it change anything given the situation that Ukraine currently finds itself in?
Well, on the one hand, it will give the United States the ability to say that we did everything the Ukrainians asked us to do as Ukraine fails. Um, it's a short-term boost for Volodymyr Zelensky, who will say, look, I'm the guy who's standing up to Russia. They may get some propaganda, opportunities if the ATACMS hits an airfield and takes out some Russian aircraft, hits a command and control center, takes out a Russian general or two. Um, you know that's it. Russia's a nation that knows war, and Russia has already lost generals. So killing two more isn't going to change the thing. Russia's lost aircraft. Blowing up a half a dozen more isn't going to change a thing. Um, so this is purely a PR stunt that unfortunately is going to result in a lot more dead Ukrainians. Look at the Kursk PR stunt. Yesterday the Russians began a counteroffensive that's just slaughtering, and I mean an emphasis on slaughtering the Ukrainian soldiers, and it's going to continue. The Ukrainians don't have the resources to halt the Russian advance in the Donbass. Sooner or later, the Ukrainians are going to break there, and we'll have to suffer the embarrassment of retreating behind the Dnieper River. So this is the PR stunt by Ukraine to, I guess, try and convince more European nations to reach deeper into their coffers to pull out more money and more military equipment to rebuild the Ukrainian military yet again, so that whatever troops they're able to muster can sally forth and be slaughtered, because that's all that's going to happen. Ukraine is not going to win this war. Ukraine is not going to turn things around. And we acknowledge this. There's not a single American leader that's saying, oh, this is going to give Ukraine the ability to flip the script. No, every American leader says there is no magic weapon. There is nothing that's going to, in and of itself, change things. But I guess there's still this forlorn hope that by dragging this war out, that somehow that'll weaken Vladimir Putin's resolve and the will of the Russian nation to back Vladimir Putin. And somehow the Russians will voluntarily hit the quit button. But that's not the Russia that I encountered when I visited last year and earlier this year.
Yeah, I mean, you can even see it in the debate last night between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. The hosts, the so-called moderators, how they approached the conflict was all about, do you believe that supporting Ukraine is important? Do you believe that it's all about garnering up this support for Ukraine?
Do you believe that Ukraine must win this war?
Yeah, exactly. It's about beliefs almost, and hopes, but it's not much about the reality. You talked about this counteroffensive that Russia is now launching in Kursk. We don't hear as much about Kursk anymore since the initial intense drive by Ukraine to usurp territory. Now it seems that Russia is on the counteroffensive, as you said. What exactly is happening? You said a lot of Ukrainians are being slaughtered, but where will this go?
I mean, it'll go until every Ukrainian is driven out of Russian soil, and then probably continue until Russia establishes a buffer zone in Sumy Oblast to keep Ukrainians from repeating this error. There's no other alternative. I mean, it's not like Russia's going to say, oh, well, I guess you get part of Kursk. It doesn't work that way. Russia will reclaim all of its territory, and it'll do so emphasizing violence. All Kursk did is give the Russians the opportunity to open up yet another front in this war of attrition. And business has been very good. We're talking upwards of 12,000 Ukrainians have been eliminated from the field of battle there. we're talking about maybe they went in with 20 or 30,000 reserves. They're coming close to losing 50% of their strategic reserves. And the battle is only now just getting, you know, joined in by the Russians, by serious Russian forces. The Russians may have assembled up to 60,000 troops to take on the Ukrainians. And when they destroy the Ukrainians, and they will destroy the Ukrainians, these troops will have some sort of operational momentum that will enable them to push further into Ukraine, causing the Ukrainians to lose even more territory.
Yeah, yeah, and as you said, there isn't really anyone talking about Ukraine turning the tide anymore. I mean, even CNN has been talking about just this massive exodus of Ukrainian troops from the front lines. Something like this year alone, like 19,000 or so, just leaving, running. I mean, escaping, fleeing from the front lines. Could you talk about this crisis for Ukraine on the front lines, in particular? What exactly is causing this crisis right now? Because we're hearing about it from the media to an extent, but it certainly did not receive attention in the debate last night. It isn't there. There isn't glaring alarms for the American people.
Well, I mean, according to the Biden/Harris narrative, um, Ukraine is heroically resisting the Russians. They're inflicting horrific harm on the Russians, destroying equipment, killing and wounding men. And they're causing economic damage to Russia. Russia, according to the Western narrative, is superficially covering for this by pumping up their defense industry. But according to the Western narrative, this is creating irreparable harm on Russia's civilian industry, that eventually the Russian economy will collapse because of this war. And then with it, Vladimir Putin's political support will collapse. And hopefully the West will end up with either a Putin that's gone into exile or a very weakened Putin who will be compliant to Western demands. That's the that's the dream of the West and of Ukraine. But that's not the reality. The reality is far different. Where this is going, it's not going to end well for either Ukraine or the West. Remember, we got to view this war in a broader perspective than simply focusing on the battlefield. Remember that this started off as primarily an economic war before. We talked about sanctioning Russia. The whole goal was that we were going to sanction Russia into submission. That didn't work. In fact, it backfired. And now we have Europe in an absolute economic tailspin. We have Germany collapsing. The political consequences of these economic problems is devastating. Britain's on its 5th prime minister in 5 years. Germany's Olaf Scholz looks like he's heading down the toilet bowl of political life. His coalition did not fare well in the regional elections in Germany, in Thuringia and Saxony earlier this month. France is in a political crisis with Macron reaching down to the 4th or 5th party to find a leader because he's not willing to accept the will of the French people and empower the representative of the party that won the most votes. It's just Europe is in a free fall. The economy is trashed because of high energy prices and bad decisions, including the diversion of over 150 billion euro into this conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, around the world, nations not only have failed to side up with the West and sanction Russia, they are siding on Russia's side. And we see this in the upcoming BRICS summit. Again, this is going to be a game-changing event that's going to redefine the world. And, and the reason why it's happening is because of the conflict in Ukraine and how the West has overplayed its hand, trying to bully people through economic sanctions, through indirect and direct pressure, threats, to yield to the policy imperatives of the United States, and the world is saying no. One of the key things that's happening right now is de-dollarization. I don't think the United States has woken up to the fact that 158 nations have committed to the BRICS conceptual plan to de-dollarize. This is huge. This will have a devastating impact on the economy. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that's outside of the framework of the battlefield that people aren't taking into account. We tend to get very focused on the battlefield: how many dead Ukrainians, how many destroyed tanks, what's going on, how are the arrows moving. But as you pull away, the battlefield becomes less and less important. I mean, the most important thing about this battlefield is the war of attrition, is the fact that the Ukrainians are grinding up Ukrainian manpower, mercenary manpower, Ukrainian and NATO provided equipment at a rate far greater than they're able to replace. So Ukraine just gets weaker every single day. Russia, on the other hand, is bringing in troops that far exceed daily casualty rates. They're equipping them with modern equipment. They're able to repair equipment. So Russia's getting stronger every day. Ukraine's getting weaker every day. And eventually the correlation of forces will be such that Russia will be able to readily, roll over the Ukrainian military. So, that's where things stand.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I do agree with you. We are almost at this point of being beyond the battlefield, so to speak, because while, of course, there is a war being waged on that battlefield, there is this, I think, what we've talked about so much on this show, Scott, the reality on the battlefield is really a reflection of what's happening more broadly, and that is that this conflict has not gone in the way that the United States and its NATO so-called partners had hoped it would go. And whether that's the economic war or whether what's happening on the battlefield, I mean, even now, they do have to acknowledge that not only is Russia making gains, but they have to acknowledge that whether it's by silence or actually saying it, that they're not achieving the goals that Ukraine had, which is to supposedly take back all of the territory that Russia has been able to incorporate into the Russian Federation. None of that is remotely possible, right, Scott?
Not as things currently stand. No, I mean, I could have, I guess, if Russia proves not to be as resilient politically and economically and militarily as they appear to be, I guess one could hypothesize a scenario where the Russian people rise up and demand Vladimir Putin's ouster. And then, as a result, the new Russian government yields to all of the Ukrainian Western demands and returns Crimea and returns the Donbass and returns Novorossiya, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. I mean, I could, take a lot of meth, I guess, and maybe that scenario would make sense. But reality kicks in, and that none of that's going to happen. Vladimir Putin won an election in March decisively, even though he was the only viable candidate on the ballot. Generally speaking, when that happens, people, tend to not participate. They become disgusted in the process, and so you get low turnouts, and your margin of victory is similarly deficient. But now, what we had was a record-breaking turnout, which means that by participating in the elections, the Russian people are in effect saying that they trust the system. And 88% of those who participated in the election picked Vladimir Putin to be their man. It's unprecedented. This is a genuinely popular leader who has a broad mandate to govern. And one of the reasons why the Russians trust him to govern is he's done such a bang-up job for the last quarter century. He's the guy that took Russia out of the doldrums, not worse than the doldrums, out of the depths of the abyss. Russia has been fundamentally broken by a decade of of neo-colonial abuse at the at the hands of people who claim to be Russia's friends, the United States, Great Britain, the European Union, and others. They were just going into Russia to rape it economically, and Vladimir Putin put an end to that and rallied Russia, and today Russia is a very, very successful nation state.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And none of this, again, for those who may be listening who believe this is just parroting, Russian talking points or Russian propaganda. All of this has been acknowledged by the United States and by NATO at some level. Even in the last week, we've had just a slew of articles coming out, publications, CNN, New York Times, I believe today, just talking about the really difficult, if not absolutely impossible situation for Ukraine on the battlefield, which, of course, you will not see the media say, well, Russia's in a great position and it's stable and it's become this powerful nation state. But by having to acknowledge this, the default is that Russia is in a lot better position than what has been made out to be by the collective West. And so any final comment on this before we move on?
No, I mean, I just again want to remind people how close we are to nuclear war. That the irresponsible policies of the Biden administration are pushing Russia into a corner from which they may have no alternative but to use nuclear power to resolve the situation. It's not that Russia's looking for a fight. It's that the United States and NATO are creating the conditions of an existential struggle that Russia will have to make some critical decisions on how to proceed. We know that the Russians, they've announced it, that they have redone or rethought their nuclear posture. I had an interesting conversation with Ambassador Polyansky, the deputy ambassador at the United Nations. And I said, look, I don't know what Russia's policy is, and it's probably secret. But if you study Russian doctrine and you study the history of Russia, the development of their doctrine, how Russia traditionally, views nuclear weapons and the potential of nuclear war, you'll know that Russia has taken a stance that's more deterrence based than anything else, that they seek to deter anybody from using weapons against Russia by promising that if weapons are used against Russia, they'll be able to wipe out whoever attacks them. Russia's had to change this because of the realities that they face. These long-range strike weapons we talk about, understand that if they're incorporated into a NATO plan, which is something Russia's been concerned about from day one. If you recall, going back into December of 2021, when the Russians submitted their draft treaty, one of the main things they said is we have to keep long-range NATO weapons out of Ukraine, because Ukraine, if you take a look at the map, just extends into the depth of Russia. And from the Ukrainian border, you're able to reach cities and strategic locations that, otherwise, if this was still the Soviet Union, there'd be no chance for weapons to reach. If NATO deploys these weapons on Russian or on Ukrainian territory, even if they're, painted with the Ukrainian flag, you now have the ability to deliver at a moment's notice precision strike offensive capabilities that could be delivered preemptively, meaning try and take out Russian command and control, take out Russian early warning using these Ukrainian proxy forces, and then follow up with NATO's own long-range strike missiles, again, designed to suppress and destroy Russia's ability to respond. And then, if necessary, hit Russia with preemptive nuclear attack to take out their strategic, nuclear retaliation capabilities. From the Russian perspective, you got to sit there and say, this is all a possibility. And when we look at, the policy of the United States and NATO to strategically defeat Russia, it moves from being a possibility to a probability. And so how does Russia respond? Russia has to come up with its own nuclear doctrine. How do you preempt preemption? And that's what it is. because if Russia's concerned about these missiles, these Western missiles in Ukraine being used as the initial salvo in a preemptive strike by NATO and the United States against Russia, how do you preempt that? By positioning yourself even further forward with a more sensitive hair trigger and be able to respond instantaneously to any perception that NATO is getting ready to launch a preemptive strike, which means Russia's posture is going to be conducive to error, mistake, miscalculation. There's a movie out, Reagan. Look, if you're my age and you grew up in that era and you were a Republican or conservative, you're going to love this movie because it sort of captures the legendary aspects of the individual. If you're a Democrat, you're going to hate this movie because you're pre-programmed to hate Ronald Reagan regardless. But the interesting thing about this movie is it captures, I think, the danger of the era that we lived in, the 1980s, extremely dangerous era. And they show a White House Situation Room where the nuclear football is being opened up and Reagan's being told, you got to launch now. You got to launch now. They've detected Russian ICBMs inbound. If you wait much longer, they're going to be able to hit. We're not going to be able to get things out. It's going to be a disaster. Respond now, respond now, respond now, respond now. And Reagan held off just a little bit. And right when he was getting ready to yield to the pressure, the phone rang. And apparently, according to the movie, which is supposed to be with these set piece places, supposed to be based almost directly on transcripts that were of the meeting at the time. It turned out to be a flock of birds had set off a radar that misinterpreted the signal to be an incoming missile attack. We almost went to war. We had Able Archer 83, a military exercise where we were testing our own nuclear command and control systems, and the Russians said, we think this is a cover for a preemptive strike. So they put their nuclear forces on alert. One mistake, wham, we're all dead. This is the reality that we face today, and I want every American to know that we are closer today to nuclear annihilation than we have been at any time in our history. It's a far more dangerous situation today that we face than was faced by JFK in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Back then, even if there was a nuclear war, we're talking about extremely limited capabilities. I think the Russians had 4 ICBM equivalents, and only one of which was on the launch stand that could be fueled up. The others would probably never get fueled up because they'd be attacked preemptively and destroyed. Today, the Russians have the most sophisticated strategic nuclear deterrence the world has ever seen, both in terms of advanced submarines, bombers, but for the Russians, more critically, these modern intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Sarmat, the Yars, and others with these multiple warheads, precision guided. This is the Russian nuclear arsenal, and it's ready to go. And if we give them excuse, they will go, because as Vladimir Putin says, he can't imagine a world without Russia. And if the world wants to make such a world, then Russia will do what it takes to prevent that. That means use nuclear weapons.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.